In the darkest days of the Second World War, as Europe was engulfed in flames and the world teetered on the brink of chaos, a new and unprecedented danger began to take shape. The familiar horrors of war, roaring tanks, thunderous artillery and bombers raining destruction from the skies, were already pushing nations to their limits. Yet, beneath the surface of this global conflict, a far more insidious threat was quietly emerging, one that would challenge the very foundations of civilization itself. Deep within the laboratories of the Third Reich, German scientists, driven by ambition and the demands of their leaders, were delving into the mysteries of atomic physics. Their work was shrouded in secrecy, hidden from the prying eyes of the world and fueled by a relentless pursuit of power. Unlike the conventional weapons that had already devastated cities and claimed countless lives, this new weapon was not forged from steel or explosives. It was a force born from the very building blocks of matter, a power that, if unleashed, could obliterate entire cities in a single blinding instant. The concept was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. To harness the energy locked within the atom, to create a weapon of unimaginable destructive capability. This was the dawn of the atomic age, and the implications were staggering. The German atomic bomb program, codenamed the Uranium Club, was a clandestine operation that brought together some of the most brilliant scientific minds of the era. Among them was Werner Heisenberg, a Nobel laureate whose groundbreaking work in quantum mechanics had already changed the course of science. Heisenberg and his colleagues, many of whom were renowned physicists and chemists, were tasked with a singular, monumental goal: to unlock the secrets of nuclear fission and build a bomb that could guarantee German supremacy. The stakes could not have been higher. If Hitler's scientists succeeded, the balance of power would shift irrevocably. The destructive force of the atom, wielded by the Third Reich, would make any resistance futile and allow Hitler to impose his vision upon the world. In London and Washington, Allied leaders and military strategists watched these developments with mounting dread. Intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and whispers from occupied Europe all pointed to the same chilling possibility. Germany was racing to build an atomic bomb. The race for the bomb was not fought on open battlefields but in the shadows. It was a contest of espionage, sabotage, and scientific ingenuity, where every scrap of information could tip the scales. Allied intelligence agencies mobilized their best operatives, launching covert missions to infiltrate German research facilities, intercept communications, and disrupt supply lines. The fate of the free world depended on their success. In war rooms across London and Washington, military officers pored over maps and reports, analyzing every detail for clues about the German program's progress. The pressure was immense, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. The balance of power in the world hung by a thread. If Germany achieved nuclear capability first, the outcome of the war, and the fate of millions, would be sealed in an instant. The specter of nuclear annihilation loomed over every decision. The mere possibility that Hitler could hold the world hostage with such a weapon was enough to send shockwaves through Allied command. Every intercepted message, every coded transmission, and every report from occupied territories was scrutinized for evidence of progress in the German atomic program. The Allies could not afford to overlook a single detail. The tension was palpable. The stakes were nothing less than the survival of civilization itself. Failure was not an option. Across the world, soldiers fought and died in brutal combat, making unimaginable sacrifices. Yet, in the shadows, another battle raged, a battle for scientific supremacy and the future of humanity. At the very core of Germany's nuclear ambitions was a single irreplaceable ingredient: heavy water. This rare substance, known scientifically as deuterium oxide, was essential for the type of nuclear reactor the Germans were attempting to build. Heavy water looked and flowed just like ordinary water, but its unique properties made it invaluable for sustaining the chain reactions necessary to produce fissile material. Without it, the German atomic program would be stalled indefinitely. In a nuclear reactor, heavy water acts as a moderator, slowing down neutrons so that the fission process can continue efficiently. This was the key to unlocking the energy of the atom, and, ultimately, to building a bomb. The German scientists knew that without a reliable and abundant supply of heavy water, their efforts would be in vain. The entire project hinged on this one critical resource. Allied intelligence quickly recognized the significance of heavy water. They understood that disrupting its production could cripple the German atomic program and buy precious time for the Allied effort. There was, however, only one facility in the world capable of producing heavy water in the quantities required by the Germans, the Vemork hydroelectric plant, nestled deep in the rugged mountains of occupied Norway. The Vemork plant was a marvel of engineering, its remote location and formidable defenses making it seem almost impregnable. Yet, it was here that the fate of the world would be decided. The plant's massive turbines and intricate network of pipes and reactors were capable of producing the heavy water that Germany so desperately needed. Its destruction became the highest priority for Allied planners. The fate of millions and perhaps the entire world now rested on a single audacious plan: to destroy the Vemork facility and halt the German atomic program in its tracks. Allied strategists began to devise a mission of extraordinary daring. A small team of specially trained commandos would be tasked with infiltrating occupied Norway, traversing treacherous terrain, and striking at the heart of the German operation. This operation, codenamed Gunnerside, would require meticulous planning, flawless execution, and a willingness to risk everything for the greater good. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a desperate roll of the dice in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the future of humanity. As the world continued to fight and suffer, few realized that the outcome of the entire conflict and the fate of generations to come would hinge on the success or failure of a single daring raid in the frozen mountains of Norway. The Norsk hydro plant at Vemork, nestled deep within the rugged mountains of southern Norway, was more than just a marvel of engineering. It was a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. Built in the early 20th century, this sprawling industrial complex harnessed the immense power of the Rjukan waterfall, channeling the energy of nature itself into the service of industry. Perched precariously on the edge of a sheer granite gorge, the plant overlooked the small town of Rjukan in the Telemark region. The landscape was both breathtaking and forbidding, with steep cliffs, dense forests, and deep snow blanketing the ground for much of the year. The isolation of the site, combined with its formidable natural defenses, made it seem almost impregnable. Before the outbreak of war, Vemork stood as a proud symbol of Norwegian progress. It was the largest hydroelectric power station of its kind anywhere in the world, a beacon of technological advancement that drew visitors and engineers from across Europe. The plant's primary purpose was to generate electricity for the Norsk Hydro Company's fertilizer production, a vital industry for Norway's economy. But everything changed on April 9, 1940, when German forces invaded Norway as part of their campaign to secure strategic resources and control the North Sea. Overnight, the Vemork plant's peaceful purpose was transformed. The facility, once a symbol of hope and progress, now cast a long and ominous shadow over the future of Europe. The German military, acutely aware of the plant's unique capabilities, wasted no time in asserting control. Teams of Wehrmacht engineers and officers arrived, inspecting every inch of the facility and quickly identifying its most valuable asset: the production of heavy water, or deuterium oxide, a rare substance with unique nuclear properties. Heavy water was essential for moderating nuclear reactions, a critical component in the race to develop atomic weapons. The Germans, determined to outpace the Allies in this new and terrifying field, ordered a dramatic increase in heavy water production. Norwegian workers, now under the watchful eyes of German overseers, labored day and night to meet the new quotas. Vemork was no longer just a power plant, it had become the beating heart of the Nazi nuclear weapons program. The facility was now a vital artery, pumping the lifeblood of heavy water into the most secret and dangerous project the Third Reich had ever undertaken. The plant's location, high atop a rocky shelf and surrounded by natural barriers, made it a natural fortress. For any would-be attacker, the approach was daunting. Steep cliffs, icy rivers, and treacherous terrain offered little hope of a stealthy or easy assault. The only practical access to the plant was a single, narrow suspension bridge that spanned the deep, icy ravine of the Mana River. This bridge, swaying above the frozen waters far below, was both a lifeline and a choke point, easy to defend, nearly impossible to cross undetected. The gorge itself was a formidable obstacle, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet to the frozen river below. In winter, the snow and ice made the descent even more perilous, and the swirling winds could chill a man to the bone in minutes. The Germans, recognizing the plant's strategic importance, wasted no time in fortifying it. They brought in construction crews and military engineers to erect layers of defenses, transforming the site into a veritable fortress. Sandbags, barbed wire, and concrete bunkers sprang up around the perimeter. Machine gun nests were positioned to cover every approach, and patrols of armed soldiers became a constant presence. Elite German troops, handpicked for their discipline and combat experience, were stationed at Vemork. Their orders were clear: defend the plant at all costs, and allow no unauthorized person to approach. The task of attacking such a fortress seemed to many utterly impossible. The combination of natural and man-made defenses created a challenge that few could even contemplate overcoming. Security measures were relentless and unforgiving. Every worker and visitor was subject to strict searches and identification checks. Any sign of suspicious activity was met with immediate and often brutal response. The suspension bridge, the only direct route to the plant, was guarded day and night by armed sentries. These men, alert and well-trained, watched for any sign of movement across the snow or in the darkness. The entire compound was encircled by multiple layers of barbed wire fencing, some of which were electrified to deter any attempt at infiltration. Warning signs in German and Norwegian made it clear that trespassers would be shot on sight. Guard towers, equipped with powerful searchlights, scanned the snowy terrain throughout the long winter nights. The beams swept back and forth, illuminating the landscape and making it nearly impossible for anyone to approach unseen. Patrols of German shepherds, led by their handlers, roamed the perimeter. The dogs, trained to detect even the faintest scent or sound, were a constant threat to any would-be saboteur. Hidden machine gun nests, camouflaged beneath the snow and rocks, covered every possible approach. The ground around the plant was seeded with hundreds of S-mines, deadly anti-personnel devices that could maim or kill with a single misstep. A dedicated barracks built close to the plant housed a garrison of German soldiers. These men were kept on high alert, ready to respond to any alarm within seconds, day or night. At night, the plant glowed with an eerie light, its windows and smokestacks casting long shadows across the snow. The sense of menace was palpable. Vemork was a dragon's lair, and the dragon was very much awake. For the Allied planners in London, the challenge was immense. They pored over maps and intelligence reports, searching for any weakness in the plant's defenses. Every possible approach seemed to end in disaster. The plant's isolation, combined with its formidable defenses, made it one of the most difficult targets in all of occupied Europe. The question was simple, but the answer was elusive. How could they strike such a remote and well-defended site? A conventional bombing raid was quickly ruled out. The risk of missing the target or causing catastrophic damage to the surrounding area was simply too great. The plant's reinforced concrete basement, buried 7 stories underground, was likely to survive anything but a direct hit. The heavy water production cells were located deep within the plant, protected by thick walls of reinforced concrete. Even the most powerful bombs might fail to destroy them, and the risk of failure was unacceptable. There was another equally important consideration: the Norwegian workers at the plant. Many of these men were local residents, forced to work under German supervision. A bombing raid would almost certainly result in heavy civilian casualties, a price the Allies were unwilling to pay. The only remaining option was a surgical strike, a commando raid, carried out by a small team of highly trained men who could infiltrate the plant, destroy the heavy water production equipment, and escape before the Germans could react. Such a mission would require men of extraordinary skill, courage, and local knowledge. The Norwegian resistance, already active in the region, was the natural choice. These men knew the mountains, the weather, and the rhythms of the German patrols. The call for help went out to the Norwegian government in exile in London. The fate of the Allied nuclear effort, and perhaps the outcome of the entire war, now rested on the shoulders of a handful of determined men, ready to risk everything to strike at the heart of the Nazi war machine. Before the celebrated success of Operation Gunnerside, there was a lesser-known but pivotal event, Operation Freshman, a mission that would end in disaster and shape the course of Allied strategy in Norway. In the autumn of 1942, as the Allies grew increasingly alarmed by German advances in nuclear research, British military strategists convened in secret war rooms. Their objective: to devise a plan to cripple the Vemork heavy water plant in Norway, a facility critical to the Nazi atomic program. The plan that emerged was both innovative and fraught with risk. It called for the use of military gliders, an untested technology in the harsh Norwegian winter. The operation would be the first British airborne assault of its kind, relying on stealth, precision, and the element of surprise. 2 Horsa gliders, each loaded with a team of specially trained Royal Engineers, would be towed by Halifax bombers from airfields in Scotland. The journey would take them across the North Sea, over hostile territory, and deep into the heart of occupied Norway. The plan required the gliders to detach from their tow planes and land silently on the remote, snow-covered Hardanger Plateau, just a few miles from the Vemork plant. The landing zone was treacherous, an expanse of frozen wilderness, shrouded in darkness and battered by winter storms. Once on the ground, the Commandos would trek through the snow, carrying explosives and equipment. Their mission: infiltrate the heavily guarded facility, destroy the vital heavy water production cells, and then make a daring escape across the mountains to neutral territory in Sweden. The operation was conceived under immense pressure. Intelligence reports warned of increasing German security at Vemork, and the stakes could not have been higher. Every detail was scrutinized, but the risks were enormous. On the night of November 19, 1942, the mission commenced. The weather was brutal: howling winds, blinding snow, and sub-zero temperatures. The pilots and commandos braced themselves for the ordeal ahead. As the Halifax bombers and their gliders crossed the Norwegian coastline, they were immediately engulfed by dense clouds and relentless snowfall. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the pilots struggled to maintain course. The navigation systems, already primitive by modern standards, began to malfunction in the extreme cold. The crews relied on dead reckoning and radio signals, but the vast, featureless landscape below offered no landmarks. The first Halifax and its glider encountered violent turbulence as they neared the drop zone. The aircraft shuddered and pitched, straining the tow rope that linked bomber and glider. Suddenly, the tow rope, battered by the storm and the weight of the glider, snapped. The glider, now without guidance or power, was left to the mercy of the elements. 17 men were aboard as the glider spiraled out of control, crashing into a remote mountainside. The impact was devastating, scattering wreckage across the snow. The second Halifax, disoriented and running low on fuel, circled helplessly above the blizzard. With no clear landing site and fuel dwindling, the crew faced a grim decision. They released their glider, which also crashed in the snowbound forest, not far from the first. The men inside were thrown violently by the impact. The second Halifax, unable to return safely, crashed on its way back to base, adding to the mounting toll of the operation. For those who survived the glider crashes, the nightmare was only beginning. Injured, disoriented, and exposed to the elements, they struggled to regroup in the freezing darkness. Many had been killed instantly, while others suffered broken bones, concussions, and frostbite. Supplies were scattered or lost, and the survivors faced the grim reality of being stranded deep in enemy territory. German patrols, alerted by the crashes and the sound of engines, quickly began combing the area. The British survivors, unable to move quickly due to their injuries and the deep snow, were soon discovered. The captured men were not afforded the protections of the Geneva Convention. Instead, they were treated as saboteurs under the harshest wartime policies. Just weeks earlier, Adolf Hitler had issued the infamous Commando order, a directive that all captured Allied commandos, regardless of uniform or surrender, were to be executed immediately, without trial or mercy. The men of Operation Freshman became some of the first to fall victim to this brutal policy. Their fate was sealed the moment they were taken into custody. After harsh interrogations by the Gestapo, the survivors were executed in the snowbound forests of Norway. Their sacrifice would remain a somber chapter in the annals of special operations. The mission was a total catastrophe. Not a single objective was achieved, and the cost in lives and morale was immense. News of the tragedy reached Britain, where comrades mourned the loss of their fellow soldiers. The failure cast a long shadow over future operations. The loss was not only measured in men. The element of surprise was lost, and the Germans were now fully aware of Allied intentions. Among the wreckage, German forces recovered maps, documents, and equipment, providing them with invaluable intelligence about the Allies' plans and the strategic importance of Vemork. The Germans responded swiftly, reinforcing the Vemork plant with additional troops, machine gun nests, and searchlights. The facility, already a fortress, became even more impenetrable. In London, the Special Operations Executive, tasked with sabotage and espionage, analyzed every detail of the failed mission. The lessons were harsh but invaluable. Despite the setback, the resolve of the SOE and its agents only grew stronger. They refused to abandon the mission to halt Nazi nuclear ambitions. The tragedy of Operation Freshman became a rallying point, hardening the determination of those who would follow. A new approach was needed, one that would minimize risk, maximize stealth, and rely on local expertise. The next operation would be entrusted to a small elite team of Norwegian Commandos, men intimately familiar with the land, the language, and the dangers that awaited. Their mission would become the stuff of legend. Out of the ashes of Operation Freshman, a mission that ended in tragedy and loss, a new and far more audacious strategy began to take shape. The Allies, recognizing the immense difficulty of striking deep within Nazi-occupied Norway, knew they needed a different approach. The lessons learned from the failed glider assault were harsh but invaluable, revealing the necessity for a team that could not only survive the brutal Norwegian winter, but also blend seamlessly into the local environment and operate with absolute stealth. This time, the mission would not be entrusted to outsiders, but to Norwegians themselves, men who knew the land, the language, and the people. The British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, decided that only native Norwegians could hope to succeed where others had failed. These men were not just ordinary soldiers. They were patriots who had risked everything to escape their occupied homeland, making perilous journeys across the North Sea to reach Britain. Many had left behind families, friends, and everything familiar, driven by a burning desire to continue the fight for Norway's freedom from afar. They became the backbone of Norwegian Independent Company 1, a unit that would soon be known by another name, Company Linge, after its first commander, Martin Linge. This elite group was formed specifically for sabotage and guerrilla operations in Norway. Under the rigorous tutelage of the SOE, these men underwent some of the most demanding training imaginable. In the remote Scottish Highlands, they learned the arts of sabotage, demolition, silent killing, and survival under the harshest conditions. Every skill was honed to perfection, for the mission ahead would require nothing less. The Norwegian Commandos were uniquely suited to the task. They had grown up in the shadow of mountains, accustomed to skiing across vast snowbound plateaus and enduring the biting cold of Nordic winters. Their knowledge of the terrain was second nature, and their ability to move swiftly and silently through the wilderness would prove invaluable. Unlike foreign operatives, these men could blend in among the local population, passing as civilians or laborers when necessary. Their fluency in the language and understanding of local customs gave them a critical edge in evading German patrols and gathering intelligence. In every sense, they were the perfect weapon for a mission that seemed impossible, a scalpel where a hammer would fail. The operation was given the code name Gunnerside. Every detail was planned with meticulous care, for the stakes could not have been higher. The target? The Vemork heavy water plant, a facility critical to the Nazi atomic program. At the heart of the operation was a remarkable young officer, Joachim Rønneberg. Though only 23 years old, Rønneberg had already proven himself a leader of exceptional ability and resolve. The responsibility he bore was immense. As the leader of the demolition team, he would be tasked with guiding his men through enemy territory, overcoming every obstacle, and ensuring the success of the mission upon which so much depended. Rønneberg was known for his quiet demeanor and thoughtful approach. Beneath his calm exterior, however, was a core of steel, a will unbreakable even in the face of overwhelming odds. He was chosen not only for his courage but for his ability to plan with precision and keep a cool head under pressure. Every aspect of the operation was scrutinized, every contingency considered. At his side was Knut Haukelid, a seasoned and rugged sergeant whose experience in the field was invaluable. Haukelid would command the covering party, ensuring the demolition team could reach their objective and withdraw safely. Together, Rønneberg and Haukelid handpicked a team of specialists: Frederick Kaiser, Kasper Eidland, Hans Storhaug, and Birger Stromsheim. Each man brought unique skills and unwavering commitment to the mission. All were expert skiers, able to traverse the treacherous Norwegian wilderness with speed and stealth. Their proficiency with explosives was matched only by their determination to see their homeland freed from occupation. These men were not just a team, they were already part of an elite brotherhood forged by shared hardship and a common cause. Their training in the Scottish Highlands was relentless. They endured long marches with heavy packs, obstacle courses designed to test their endurance, and exercises in sabotage and escape. Every day, they pushed themselves to the limit, knowing that only the strongest and most resourceful would survive the mission ahead. They learned to kill silently, to improvise weapons from whatever was at hand, and to survive for weeks in the frozen wilderness with minimal supplies. Winter survival was not just a skill, but a necessity. The men pored over blueprints and scale models of the Vemork plant, memorizing every corridor, every locked door, every guard post. Their insider source, Jomar Brun, the plant's former manager who had escaped to Britain, provided invaluable intelligence, giving them a detailed understanding of the facility's layout and security measures. They studied the schedules of German patrols, the locations of high-concentration cells, and the routines of the guards. Every detail was committed to memory, for there would be no second chances. Through months of training and preparation, the men were forged into a single, cohesive unit. They trusted each other with their lives, knowing that success depended on absolute teamwork and discipline. The plan itself was deceptively simple: infiltrate the plant, destroy the heavy water production cells, and escape undetected. But the execution would require flawless coordination and nerves of steel. The 6-man Gunnerside team would be dropped by parachute onto the vast, snow-covered Hardanger Plateau, a desolate expanse of ice and rock battered by winter storms and patrolled by German forces. Upon landing, they would face a grueling trek across miles of frozen wilderness, battling sub-zero temperatures, blizzards, and the constant threat of discovery. Their first objective: to rendezvous with the advance reconnaissance team already operating in the area. This advance party, known as the Swallow Team, had been dropped into Norway months earlier. They had survived the winter in a remote hunting cabin, enduring hunger, isolation, and the ever-present danger of German patrols, all while gathering vital intelligence on the target and its defenses. Once the two teams united, they would descend from the mountains under cover of darkness, moving with stealth and precision through the forests and ravines that surrounded the Vemork plant. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's atomic ambitions. With them, they carried not only explosives and weapons, but the hopes of a free Norway, and indeed, the hopes of the entire free world, for the outcome of their mission could alter the course of history itself. Section 5, Across the Frozen Plateau, A Brutal Beginning. The story of Operation Gunnerside's approach is one of the most grueling and harrowing episodes in the annals of World War II special operations. The men who undertook this mission were not only facing a formidable enemy, but also the merciless forces of nature itself. On the night of February 17, 1943, 6 hand-picked Norwegian Commandos of the Gunnerside team gathered in the darkness at a remote airfield in Scotland. Each man was a volunteer, trained in sabotage, survival, and the art of moving unseen through hostile territory. They wore heavy winter gear, their faces set with grim determination as they prepared to board a waiting Halifax bomber. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The men checked and rechecked their equipment: parachutes, weapons, explosives, and containers packed with supplies for survival in the Arctic wilderness. Each commando was acutely aware that the fate of the mission, and perhaps the outcome of the war, rested on their shoulders. The shadow of Operation Freshman loomed large in their minds. Just months earlier, a similar attempt to destroy the heavy water plant at Vemork had ended in disaster. 2 gliders had crashed, and the survivors were captured and executed by the Germans. The Gunnerside men knew the risks. Failure could mean death, not just for themselves but for the hopes of the Allied effort to halt Nazi atomic ambitions. As the Halifax bomber roared into the night sky, it carried its precious cargo eastward across the North Sea. The journey was perilous. Enemy fighters and anti-aircraft batteries patrolled the skies, and the weather was unpredictable. Below, the vast white expanse of the Hardanger Plateau stretched out, a frozen wilderness that seemed to go on forever. The Hardanger Plateau was a desolate, inhospitable region, an endless sea of snow and ice, broken only by the occasional outcrop of rock or stunted tree. Temperatures routinely plunged far below freezing, and the wind could strip a man's warmth in minutes. It was a place where only the hardiest could hope to survive. The pilot, straining to see through the darkness and swirling snow, searched desperately for the designated drop zone. Navigation was a challenge. There were no lights, no landmarks, only the ghostly reflection of moonlight on snow. Suddenly, fierce winds buffeted the aircraft, pushing it off course. The crew fought to maintain their heading, but the elements were relentless, threatening to scatter the team far from their intended landing site. At last, the green light flashed. One by one, the Commandos leapt into the void, plunging into the black, freezing night. Each man carried a heavy load: parachutes, weapons, explosives, and containers of vital supplies. knowing that every item could mean the difference between life and death. The landing was rough. Instead of touching down near their rendezvous, the men found themselves scattered across a frozen lake, more than 25 kilometers from their intended point. The ice groaned beneath their weight as they gathered their gear, the realization of their predicament settling in. The brutal reality of their situation hit them immediately. They were deep in enemy-occupied territory, isolated and exposed to the elements. As if summoned by fate, a blizzard of unprecedented ferocity swept across the plateau. The wind howled, driving snow into every crevice, reducing visibility to almost nothing. For 5 agonizing days the men were pinned down, unable to move. They huddled together for warmth, their bodies battered by the relentless storm, their spirits tested by hunger and exhaustion. The temperature plummeted to well below zero, and the wind screamed across the plateau, threatening to freeze exposed flesh in minutes. Every hour was a battle for survival. The Commandos dug into the snow, carving out makeshift shelters to escape the worst of the wind. They rationed their meager food supplies, melting snow for water, and taking turns to keep watch for German patrols. Sleep was fitful and brief, as the cold seeped into their bones. The men fought to stay awake, knowing that to fall asleep for too long could mean never waking up. Many would have succumbed to despair, or the elements. But these men were no ordinary soldiers. They were men of the mountains, Norwegian patriots trained in the art of survival, hardened by years of resistance and hardship. Their resilience and camaraderie kept them alive. When the storm finally abated, the landscape was transformed. Drifts of snow covered their tracks, and the world was eerily silent. The men emerged from their shelters, battered but unbroken, and began the next phase of their journey, finding the advanced Swallow team. Hauling their heavy packs and weapons, the Commandos strapped on skis and set out across the endless white. Every step was a struggle, as deep snow and hidden obstacles slowed their progress. The terrain was treacherous, a maze of hidden crevasses, sudden drops, and snow-covered rocks. A single misstep could mean disaster. Progress was painfully slow. The men labored through waist-deep snow, their muscles aching, their breath freezing in the air. After days of searching, their eyes caught a thin plume of smoke rising in the distance, a sign of life in the vast emptiness. It was a remote hunting cabin, the rendezvous point with the Swallow team. The reunion was emotional. The Gunnerside men embraced their comrades, relief and exhaustion etched on every face. For the first time in weeks, the men allowed themselves a moment of hope. They had survived the worst the plateau could throw at them. The Swallow team, led by Jens Anton Poulsen, had endured their own ordeal. For months, they had survived on little more than moss and a single reindeer, their bodies gaunt but their spirits unbroken. Now, at last, the full team was assembled, 10 men, united by a single purpose. In the cramped confines of the cabin, the men pored over maps and plans, reviewing every detail of the operation. They knew that the Germans had not been idle. The Swallow team had gathered vital intelligence, patrol schedules, guard rotations, and the latest fortifications at the Vemork plant. Every scrap of information could prove crucial. The Germans, stung by the failure of Operation Freshman, had transformed the plant into a fortress. Searchlights swept the perimeter, machine gun nests covered every approach, and patrols were doubled. The main bridge, once the most direct route, was now a death trap. Barbed wire, mines, and armed guards made any frontal assault suicidal. The men studied the defenses, shaking their heads at the impossibility of a direct attack. They needed another way in. After hours of debate, they settled on a desperate plan, one that would require every ounce of their skill and courage. Their only option was the route the Germans considered impossible: descend a sheer 300-meter-deep gorge, cross the frozen river at its base, and climb the treacherous rock face on the far side. This would bring them to the plant's least guarded rear access point, a narrow, icy ledge above the river. The prospect was terrifying. But for these men, there was no turning back. The fate of the mission, and perhaps the world, rested on their shoulders. On the bitterly cold night of February 27, 1943, a small team of Norwegian commandos, hand-picked for their resilience and skill, began the most critical phase of their mission. These men, members of the Norwegian resistance trained by the British Special Operations Executive, had spent weeks surviving in the harsh wilderness, enduring hunger, frostbite, and isolation. Now, after months of planning and reconnaissance, they were ready to make their final approach, to the heavily guarded Vemork plant, a facility at the heart of Nazi Germany's atomic ambitions. Emerging from their primitive snow shelter high on the plateau, the Commandos strapped on their skis and silently glided down the slope. The biting wind cut through their winter gear, but adrenaline and determination kept them moving. Every movement was calculated, every sound scrutinized, as they descended toward the dark, imposing silhouette of the Vemork plant nestled deep in the valley below. Overhead, a brilliant full moon illuminated the snow-blanketed landscape, transforming the night into a world of stark contrasts. The moonlight, while beautiful, was a double-edged sword. It made navigation easier but also increased the risk of detection by German sentries patrolling the area. The air was utterly still, the kind of cold that makes every breath visible and every sound travel for miles. In this silence, even the crunch of snow underfoot or the faint clink of equipment seemed dangerously loud, amplifying the tension with every step. The team halted at the edge of a deep, forbidding gorge. Peering over the rim, they saw the sheer drop into darkness, a natural barrier that the Germans believed to be impassable, and thus left largely unguarded. Far below, the Mana River wound its way through the gorge, a ribbon of black ice reflecting the moonlight. The river, partially frozen and treacherous, was both an obstacle and a potential route for the daring Commandos. Across the chasm, the Vemork factory loomed, its faint lights glowing ominously in the darkness. The hum of machinery inside was a constant reminder of the high-stakes mission to sabotage the plant's production of heavy water, a key component in the German nuclear program. The main bridge spanning the gorge was heavily guarded by German sentries, and the surrounding area was laced with mines and patrols. The enemy was confident that no one could cross the chasm below, considering it a natural fortress. But the Norwegian Commandos, driven by a sense of duty and the knowledge of what was at stake, were determined to prove the enemy wrong. They had studied the terrain for weeks, memorizing every rock and tree, and now prepared for the most dangerous part of their journey. The descent into the gorge was a harrowing ordeal. The cliff face was steep, nearly vertical in places, and coated in a treacherous mix of snow and ice. Each commando moved with painstaking care, testing every foothold and handhold before committing their weight. Their boots slipped on the slick rock, and their gloved hands struggled to find purchase on the frozen surface. The risk of a fatal fall was ever present, and the men knew that a single mistake could mean disaster, not just for themselves, but for the entire mission. Looking down from the cliff, the abyss seemed endless. A single loose stone, dislodged by a careless step, tumbled silently into the darkness, a stark reminder of the peril they faced. The Commandos worked as a team, passing equipment hand to hand, each man relying on the others for support. Their training and trust in one another were their greatest assets in this life-or-death situation. Sparse trees and jagged rock outcroppings provided the only anchors. The men's fingers, numb with cold, gripped whatever they could find, inching their way down the cliff with agonizing slowness. Every dislodged stone or scrape of metal sounded deafening in the profound silence. The Commandos cast nervous glances toward the bridge above, knowing that any noise could bring German guards rushing to investigate. The descent became a slow-motion ballet, each movement deliberate and precise. The men balanced on the edge of disaster, fully aware that the slightest misstep would be fatal. After what felt like an eternity, the team finally reached the bottom of the gorge. Their muscles ached from the strain, but relief was tempered by the knowledge that the most dangerous part of the mission still lay ahead. They paused only briefly, checking their surroundings, and quietly acknowledging their success in making it down undetected. There was no time for celebration. Every second counted. The next obstacle was the Mana River itself. The surface was a patchwork of thick and thin ice, made unpredictable by the turbulent water flowing beneath, fed by the plant's turbines. The Commandos knew that the ice could give way at any moment. Some sections were solid, while others were dangerously thin, weakened by the constant movement of water below. To minimize the risk, the men spread out, using their ski poles to probe the ice ahead. Each step was a test of nerve and judgment, as they listened for the telltale cracks that signaled danger. The sound of ice cracking under their boots was a constant nerve-shredding companion. Every man was acutely aware that a plunge into the freezing river would be fatal, both to himself and to the mission. Miraculously, the team made it across the river without incident. But their ordeal was far from over. Ahead of them loomed the opposite cliff, just as steep and icy as the one they had descended. The ascent was grueling. The men dug their crampons into the ice, hauling themselves upward with the last reserves of their strength. The darkness and cold made every movement a test of willpower. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, but the knowledge of what was at stake, the fate of the Allied war effort, drove them on. Each man clawed his way up the cliff, refusing to give in to fatigue or fear. Their faces were drawn with strain, their hands raw and numb from the cold. Yet, not a single complaint was uttered. The mission, and the trust they placed in one another, kept them moving. At last the Commandos pulled themselves over the top of the cliff and onto a narrow-service railway line. This track, running directly into the plant compound, was their gateway to the heart of the enemy's operation. They had achieved the impossible. By taking this perilous route, they had bypassed the heavily guarded bridge, the minefields, and the main German patrols. Their ingenuity and courage had brought them to the very doorstep of their objective. Now, they were behind the primary German defenses, deep inside enemy territory. The risk of discovery was higher than ever, but so was their determination. The team paused for a brief moment, catching their breath and checking their weapons and explosives. Every piece of equipment was vital. Every man knew his role in the operation. From their vantage point, the Commandos could now see the main building of the Vemork plant, just a few hundred meters away. The final target was within reach. The time was just after midnight on February 28th. The night was far from over, and the most dangerous phase of the mission was about to begin. With hearts pounding and nerves steeled, the Commandos prepared for the final assault. Operation Gunnerside was entering its decisive moment, and the fate of the war could hinge on what happened next. Under the cover of darkness, the Commandos advanced along the railway tracks, their movements so silent and deliberate that they seemed almost spectral. Every step was calculated, every breath measured as they pressed forward through the biting Norwegian winter night. The moon cast a pale glow, illuminating the frost that clung to the rails and the boots of the men who risked everything for the mission. The air around the plant was thick, not just with the cold, but with the ever-present hum of heavy machinery. This was the Norsk hydro plant at Vemork, a fortress of industry perched on a remote mountainside, its machines working tirelessly to produce heavy water, a substance critical to the German nuclear program. The Commandos knew that every sound could betray them, so they moved with utmost caution, blending into the industrial haze. As they approached the perimeter, a padlocked gate loomed before them, a formidable barrier of steel and wire. This was the first of many obstacles designed to keep intruders out and protect the precious cargo within. The team had studied maps and blueprints for weeks, and this spot had been chosen with care. It was the least visible to the German sentries and offered the most direct route to their objective. With nerves of steel, one commando produced a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. The cold metal bit into the chain, and with a single sharp crack, a sound that seemed deafening in the stillness, the barrier was breached. For a moment, all froze, listening for any sign that the noise had been detected. Satisfied that the alarm had not been raised, the men slipped through the opening one after another, vanishing into the labyrinth of shadows cast by the plant's looming structures. They were now inside enemy territory, every sense heightened, every movement deliberate. Just ahead, the German barracks stood as a silent threat. Faint lights glowed in the windows, a reminder that the enemy was close at hand. Dozens of German soldiers were stationed here, tasked with guarding the plant and its secrets. Beyond the barracks, the main building of the plant rose into the night sky, a massive 7-story structure of concrete and steel. This was the heart of the operation, the place where heavy water was produced and stored under the tightest security. According to their meticulous plan, the team now split into 2 groups. Each man knew his role and the critical importance of timing and coordination. Knut Haukelid, a seasoned resistance fighter, led the 5-man covering party. His experience and calm under pressure made him the ideal leader for this crucial task. Haukelid's group moved into position around the barracks, taking cover behind outbuildings and equipment. Their mission was clear: intercept any German guards who might respond to the intrusion. They were the shield, the first line of defense for the demolition team. If the alarm was raised and a firefight broke out, Haukelid's men were to hold off the garrison for as long as possible. Every minute they could buy was vital for the success of the mission and the survival of their comrades. The covering party melted into the darkness, finding concealment behind storage tanks and industrial machinery. Submachine guns were gripped tightly, eyes scanning for any sign of movement from the barracks. The tension was palpable. Each man's breath formed clouds in the frigid air, their faces set in grim determination. They watched the barracks, nerves stretched taut, ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. Meanwhile, the fate of the entire operation rested with the demolition squad, led by Joachim Rønneberg. These men had trained for months, rehearsing every step of the mission until it became second nature. Rønneberg, accompanied by Kaiser, Eidland, and Stromsheim, began their approach to the main building. Each man carried explosives, tools, and the weight of history on his shoulders. Their objective was deep within the plant, the heavy water concentration cells, located in a heavily fortified basement. The Germans had spared no expense in securing this area, knowing its strategic value. The team reached the door they had identified from blueprints, only to find it locked tight. The reinforced steel and complex locking mechanism were designed to withstand forced entry. For a brief, agonizing moment, doubt crept in. Had all their planning been for nothing? The seconds ticked by, each one increasing the risk of discovery. The plan had hit a critical snag. The locked door threatened to derail the entire operation, but the team's exhaustive preparation now proved invaluable. They recalled the intelligence provided by Jomar Brun, the plant manager who had risked his life to aid the Allies. Brun had revealed the existence of a secondary access point, a narrow, vertical cable duct that ran the height of the building, filled with pipes and electrical conduits. It was a maintenance shaft, rarely used and easily overlooked by the Germans. The duct was barely wide enough for a man to fit, but it offered a way past the locked door. With no other options, the Commandos prepared to squeeze through the claustrophobic passage. Rønneberg and Kaiser located the entrance to the duct, hidden behind a tangle of pipes and machinery. They steeled themselves for the difficult descent. One after another, they squeezed inside, inching their way down the vertical shaft. The metal walls pressed in on all sides, amplifying every sound and making each movement a test of nerve and endurance. At last they emerged into the bowels of the plant, a maze of humming machinery, pipes and gauges. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, the noise of the machines masking their arrival. They had reached the high-concentration room, the very heart of the heavy water production process. This was the culmination of months of planning and perilous travel. Inside, a single Norwegian worker was on duty, tending to the machinery. He was unaware of the drama unfolding around him, his routine shattered by the sudden appearance of armed commandos. The worker stared in disbelief, his eyes wide with shock and fear as he took in the sight of the uniformed men, weapons drawn and faces grim. Rønneberg, keeping his voice calm and steady, quickly explained their purpose. He assured the worker that they meant him no harm, and that their mission was of the utmost importance. Realizing the gravity of the situation and recognizing the men as fellow Norwegians, the worker agreed to help, risking his own safety for the greater good. With the workers' assistance, the path to the heavy water cells, the very core of Hitler's nuclear ambitions, was now open. The Commandos moved swiftly, knowing that every second counted. The most critical moments of Operation Gunnerside were now at hand. The fate of the mission, and perhaps the course of the war itself, hung in the balance as the Commandos prepared to strike at the heart of the Nazi nuclear program. Deep beneath the snow-covered Norwegian landscape, inside the brightly lit, concrete-walled basement of the Vemork plant, the demolition team moved with a sense of urgency, honed by months of rigorous training and planning. Every second counted. The men, dressed in heavy winter gear and carrying the tools of sabotage, were acutely aware that the fate of the Allied atomic effort, and perhaps the outcome of the war itself, rested on their shoulders. The air vibrated with the steady mechanical hum of the electrolysis equipment, a sound that had become synonymous with the German quest for nuclear power. This machinery, running day and night, was the heart of the Nazi heavy water program, producing the rare substance essential for their atomic research. Before the saboteurs stood 18 gleaming stainless steel cylinders, each one a high-concentration cell. These were not ordinary pieces of equipment. They represented the culmination of years of scientific effort, designed to extract and concentrate deuterium oxide, heavy water, at a purity unmatched anywhere else in the world. The Germans believed these cylinders would give them the edge in the race to build an atomic bomb. For the men of Operation Gunnerside, this was the ultimate target. Destroying these cells would set back the German nuclear program by months, if not years, and possibly prevent the Nazis from ever achieving a working atomic weapon. Joachim Rønneberg, the team leader and Knut Haukelid's close associate, Frederick Kaiser, began the delicate process of laying the explosive charges. Every movement was deliberate, every action calculated. The explosives were not ordinary dynamite, but specially designed sausages of nitrocellulose, chosen for their stability and effectiveness in confined spaces. The men placed them with meticulous care, pressing them against the most vulnerable points of the cylinders, ensuring maximum damage to the machinery. The placement of each charge was critical. A single misstep, a charge set too loosely or in the wrong spot, could mean the difference between a successful mission and catastrophic failure. The saboteurs had rehearsed this moment countless times in the wilds of Scotland, but now, under the harsh glare of factory lights and the ever-present threat of discovery, the pressure was immense. Every movement was precise, every action born of months of relentless training. The men worked in near silence, communicating with brief gestures and nods, their faces set in grim determination. Suddenly, in the midst of this tense operation, an unexpected and almost absurd interruption occurred. The Norwegian night watchman, who had been startled by the arrival of the Commandos, realized with growing panic that he had lost his eyeglasses somewhere in the chaos. Without them, he would be unable to navigate his way out of the labyrinthine plant, a potentially fatal predicament. He began searching the floor frantically, his hands sweeping across the cold concrete, his anxiety mounting with every passing second. The Commandos, aware that any noise or delay could bring German guards running, watched him with a mixture of frustration and sympathy. In a remarkable display of composure and leadership, Rønneberg signaled for the team to halt their work. The entire operation, balanced on a knife's edge, paused in the heart of enemy territory. For a few tense moments, the saboteurs and the night watchman searched the floor together, their eyes scanning the dimly lit concrete for the missing glasses. The risk was enormous, but the alternative, leaving a man behind, was unthinkable. At last, the glasses were found. The worker, his relief palpable, nodded his thanks, and the team immediately resumed their critical task, the brief interruption only heightening the tension in the room. In that fleeting moment, a sense of shared humanity flickered among the men, a reminder that even in the midst of war, compassion and camaraderie could prevail. With all 20 explosive charges now in place, Rønneberg prepared for the final, irreversible step. He selected 2 separate fuses, each carefully measured and cut to a precise length, 30 seconds. This was not a random choice, but a calculated decision based on the team's rehearsals and the layout of the plant. The use of 2 fuses provided a crucial redundancy. If one failed, the other would still ignite the charges. The 30-second length was a compromise, long enough to allow the team to escape, but short enough to prevent the Germans from intervening. A longer fuse risked discovery and disarmament by German guards, while a shorter fuse could trap the saboteurs in the blast. The margin for error was razor-thin. The men exchanged tense glances, each one acutely aware of the stakes. Their escape route had been planned in advance, but the reality of the moment brought a new level of intensity. 30 seconds, just half a minute, stood between them and either triumph or disaster. The ticking of a stopwatch, the hiss of the fuse, and the pounding of their own hearts filled the silence. With a steady hand, Rønneberg struck a match and lit the fuses. The fuses sparked to life, hissing and spitting in the quiet, electrified air. "Get out!" Rønneberg shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. The Commandos, joined by the Norwegian worker, scrambled out of the room, retracing their steps up the narrow cable duct that had brought them into the heart of the plant. Every movement was a race against time. Bursting from the confines of the basement, they sprinted through the main building and out into the frozen Norwegian night, their breath steaming in the frigid air as they raced to rejoin Haukelid's covering party, waiting anxiously in the darkness. For the men outside, every second dragged on interminably. 30 seconds felt like an eternity as they waited for the signal that the mission had succeeded, or failed. Then, from deep within the plant, a dull, muffled thud reverberated through the ground. The explosion was not the deafening roar of Hollywood films, but a low, powerful concussion, its force absorbed by the thick concrete walls of the basement. The saboteurs had calculated this as well, knowing that a contained blast would minimize the risk of immediate detection. An eyewitness would later describe the sound as being like 2 or 3 cars colliding in the night, enough to be noticed but not enough to raise the alarm. A single German guard, roused by the noise, stepped out of the barracks and peered into the darkness. Seeing nothing amiss, he returned inside, unaware that the heart of the German atomic program had just been dealt a devastating blow. The sirens remained silent. The plant for the moment was oblivious to the sabotage that had just occurred within its walls. Inside, the results of the operation were immediately apparent. The charges had ruptured the cylinders, twisted metal and shattered machinery, marking the spot where the world's purest heavy water had once been produced. Over 500 kilograms of heavy water, the entire German stockpile, was now pouring uselessly onto the basement floor, draining away the Nazi hope for an atomic bomb and marking a turning point in the secret war for the atom. As the first piercing sirens began to wail across the cold moonlit valley, signaling an emergency at the Norsk hydro plant, the local townspeople and German occupiers alike were thrown into confusion and alarm. But by the time the alarm lights flashed in the distant town, the Commandos, those meticulously trained saboteurs, were already gone, having vanished into the night with the precision and discipline that had defined their entire mission. The Commandos, clad in heavy winter gear designed to blend seamlessly with the snow-laden forest, moved with practiced silence. Their escape was not a panicked flight, but a carefully orchestrated withdrawal, honed through months of training in the harsh Norwegian wilderness. Every step was calculated, every movement rehearsed, as they melted into the snowy landscape, leaving behind no trace of their presence. Reaching the railway line, the team regrouped with military efficiency. They quickly located the section of wire fence they had identified during their reconnaissance, and, using wire cutters brought for this very purpose, sliced through the barrier. The saboteurs, well versed in the art of stealth, moved with urgency but without haste, knowing that every second counted. Once through the fence, the men slipped into the deep, shadowy gorge that had served as both their entry and escape route. The terrain was treacherous, icy, steep, and unforgiving, but the Commandos had spent weeks memorizing every feature of the landscape, practicing their movements in darkness and snow to ensure nothing would be left to chance. Retracing their perilous route, the men navigated the same icy mountain paths they had used to approach the plant. The journey was fraught with danger. One misstep could mean a fatal fall, and the biting wind threatened to sap their strength. Yet their determination and camaraderie kept them moving forward, step by grueling step. The Commandos scrambled down sheer, ice-coated cliffs, using ropes and makeshift anchors to steady themselves. At the bottom, they faced the frozen river, a barrier as deadly as any German patrol. With practiced skill, they crossed the brittle ice, knowing that beneath them, the frigid waters could claim any man who faltered. Their ordeal was far from over. Ahead lay the grueling climb back up to the plateau, a test of endurance and willpower. The men, exhausted but resolute, pressed on, their breath steaming in the frigid air as they ascended the steep, snow-choked slopes. Meanwhile, chaos erupted inside the industrial plant. Factory workers, caught off guard by the sudden alarms and explosions, scrambled under the harsh glare of emergency lights. The Germans, realizing too late that a sabotage operation was underway, rushed to respond, but confusion reigned. German soldiers, now fully alert, deployed searchlights that swept the valley and mountainsides in desperate arcs, probing the darkness for any sign of the intruders. The beams illuminated the snow, but the Commandos had already vanished into the labyrinth of the Norwegian wilderness. Patrols were dispatched in every direction, combing the forests and ravines, but the raiders had planned their escape with such meticulous care that not even the most determined search could uncover their trail. The empty snow-covered trails bore no footprints, as the wind and falling snow quickly erased any evidence of their passage. To the Germans, it was as if the saboteurs had simply vanished into thin air, phantoms swallowed by the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The Norwegian mountains, with their endless peaks and dense forests, became both shield and sanctuary for the escaping men. The landscape, so harsh and deadly to the unprepared, was an ally to those who knew its secrets. Recognizing the increased risk of capture if they remained together, the team made the difficult decision to split up. This tactic, often used by resistance fighters, increased their chances of survival and made it nearly impossible for the Germans to track them all. Joachim Rønneberg, the operations leader, and 4 others embarked on an epic journey, 400 kilometers on skis across some of the most inhospitable terrain in Europe. Their destination, neutral Sweden, a sanctuary beyond the reach of German forces. The trek took 2 grueling weeks. The men battled blizzards, sub-zero temperatures, and the constant threat of German patrols. Supplies were scarce and exhaustion was a constant companion, but their training and resolve saw them through. The other commandos remained in Norway, blending into local villages and continuing their work with the resistance. Their knowledge of the land and support from sympathetic locals allowed them to evade capture and strike again when needed. Against all odds, every member of the team survived. Their reunion in a safe house deep in the snowbound countryside was a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to their skill, discipline, and unbreakable spirit. The raid was a flawless success. The Commandos had achieved their objective without firing a single shot, relying on stealth, planning, and teamwork rather than brute force. Not a single shot was fired during the infiltration or the escape. The Germans, caught completely off guard, were left to piece together what had happened only after the saboteurs were long gone. There were no casualties on either side, a rare outcome in such a high-stakes operation, and a testament to the professionalism of the men involved. The Special Operations Executive, the British organization that had planned and supported the mission, hailed Operation Gunnerside as the most successful act of sabotage in the entire Second World War. Newspapers across the Allied world celebrated the achievement, though the full details would remain secret for years. The impact of the operation was nothing short of monumental. The destruction of the heavy water production facility at Vemork sent shockwaves through the German High Command and altered the course of the war's secret nuclear race. The Commandos had destroyed not only the existing stocks of heavy water, but also the specialized equipment required to produce more. This set the German atomic program back by critical months, time that the Allies desperately needed. The Germans, furious and frustrated, attempted to repair the plant, but the damage was extensive. Replacement parts were difficult to obtain, and the expertise required to rebuild the facility was in short supply. Despite their best efforts, the repairs dragged on for months. The loss of heavy water production was a blow from which the German nuclear program would never fully recover. The shattered machinery and ruined infrastructure inside the plant stood as silent testimony to the effectiveness of the raid. Every piece of equipment destroyed represented another setback for Hitler's atomic ambitions. When the Germans finally managed to produce a small quantity of heavy water, they attempted to ship it to Germany for safekeeping. The barrels were loaded onto the ferry SF Hydro, which was to cross Lake Tinn under heavy guard. Knut Haukelid, one of the original Gunnerside raiders and a veteran of the Norwegian resistance, was tasked with ensuring that this final shipment would never reach its destination. Haukelid and his team planted explosives aboard the SF Hydro, and in a daring act of sabotage, sent the ferry and its precious cargo to the bottom of the icy lake. The heavy water was lost forever, and with it, any realistic hope the Nazis had of building an atomic bomb. The sinking of the SF Hydro marked the final chapter in the battle for control of heavy water. The cold waters of Lake Tinn became the grave of Hitler's atomic dreams. The nuclear race, once balanced on a knife's edge, was now decisively in favor of the Allies. The heroes of Telemark, ordinary men forged into extraordinary warriors by the demands of war, had tipped the scales. Through their courage, skill, and unwavering determination, these men had accomplished what many thought impossible. They had faced the worst the enemy and the environment could throw at them, and emerged victorious. The consequences of their actions rippled outward, changing the course of history. The delay to the German atomic program ensured that the world would not have to face the nightmare of a Nazi nuclear weapon. Against impossible odds, in the face of nature's fury and the enemy's might, the Commandos had prevailed. Their mission was a testament to the power of preparation, teamwork, and the indomitable human spirit. They had infiltrated an impregnable fortress, evaded detection by a powerful enemy, and struck a blow that would echo through the decades. The destruction they wrought was not just physical, it was a psychological blow to the Nazi regime, a reminder that even their most secret projects were vulnerable. The story of Operation Gunnerside is more than a tale of military daring. It is a chronicle of ingenuity, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of freedom in the darkest of times. It stands as proof that a small group of determined individuals, united by a common cause, can alter the destiny of nations and the fate of the world. Operation Gunnerside was not merely a successful raid, it was a turning point in the secret war for the future of humanity. In the shadow war waged across occupied Europe, it was a decisive blow, struck with precision and courage, that helped ensure the world would not fall under the shadow of a Nazi atomic bomb. The victory at Vemork was a victory for freedom, for resistance, and for the enduring belief that even in the darkest hours, the actions of a few brave men can change the course of history forever. While the world would come to celebrate the daring saboteurs of Operation Gunnerside, another group of silent warriors played a vital, though largely unheralded role in the mission's ultimate success, the local Norwegian resistance. These men, often overlooked in the grand retelling of the raid, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, providing the critical support needed for the Commandos to carry out their impossible task. Long before the British-trained team parachuted into the frozen Norwegian wilderness, these local allies had been quietly gathering intelligence. Risking their lives daily, they mapped the labyrinthine corridors of the Vemork plant, noted the routines of German guards, and identified weaknesses in the patrol schedules. Every scrap of information secretly passed through coded messages and clandestine meetings, became a vital puzzle piece for the operations planners in London. As the Commandos made their perilous approach, it was the resistance fighters who prepared safe houses along the escape routes. These hidden refuges, sometimes little more than abandoned cabins or cleverly concealed shelters dug into the snow, offered brief moments of warmth and safety amid the deadly cold. Supplies were stashed in advance, food, dry clothing, even spare ammunition. The men who maintained these caches did so at enormous personal risk. Discovery meant certain death or deportation to concentration camps. On the night of the raid, the resistance network swung into action. Lookouts monitored German movements, signaling with lanterns or coded knocks when it was safe for the Commandos to move. In the aftermath, as German patrols fanned out across the countryside, local guides led the saboteurs through hidden paths and over treacherous mountain passes. Their knowledge of the land, where the snow was thin, where the ice was strong, which streams could be crossed, often meant the difference between life and death. Communication was another battlefield. Resistance radio operators, using makeshift transmitters hidden in barns or deep forests, relayed crucial updates to London. Each transmission was a race against time, as German direction-finding teams scoured the countryside for the telltale crackle of Allied signals. Yet through discipline and cunning, these men kept the flow of information alive, ensuring the outside world knew of both the mission's success and the ongoing danger. Even as the Commandos vanished into the Norwegian night, the resistance remained vigilant. They spread false rumors, misled German investigators, and sabotaged search efforts, throwing off the enemy's pursuit at every turn. Their actions bought the saboteurs precious hours, and sometimes a second chance when all seemed lost. Though history remembers the spectacular explosion at Vemork and the heroic escape across the mountains, it is in these quiet acts of defiance, hidden from enemy eyes, unheralded by headlines, that the true strength of resistance was revealed. The operation's success was not merely the work of a few, but the culmination of countless acts of bravery by men whose names would never be known. In the end, the silent architects of victory, the Norwegian resistance, proved that even in the darkest of times, unity and courage could forge an unbreakable shield against tyranny. Their legacy, woven into the very fabric of Operation Gunnerside, stands as a powerful reminder. Behind every act of heroism, there are those who make it possible, working in the shadows, never seeking glory, only freedom. Beneath the snow-laden pines and behind the frosted windows of remote farmhouses, another battle raged, a war of whispers and static. Operation Gunnerside's fate teetered on a fragile thread of communication, stretched across hostile territory and enemy patrols. In this hidden theater, the radio operators of the resistance fought a relentless duel against the German Reich's most formidable hunters, the direction-finding teams of the Gestapo. Each transmission was a calculated gamble. Resistance radio men, often working alone, hunched over battered transmitters cobbled together from scavenged parts, antennas snaked out of haylofts or wound through forest branches, invisible to the casual eye but all too vulnerable to discovery. The operators listened for the precise moment, the window when atmospheric conditions and enemy patrol patterns aligned. Then, with trembling hands, they tapped out coded messages in Morse, their words racing through the ether to London and back. Every second on the air increased the risk. German trucks, bristling with antennae and manned by technicians with headphones clamped tight, prowled the countryside. The faintest signal brought them closer, triangulating the source with ruthless efficiency. It became a deadly dance: transmit, pack up, and vanish into the night before the enemy could close in. But the stakes demanded the risk. Through these transmissions, London learned of shifting German patrols, sabotage plans, and the desperate need for supplies. Updates on the Commandos' progress during the raid were relayed in real time, allowing Allied command to adapt and respond. When the mission reached its most critical moments, a single burst of static-laden code could mean the difference between life and death. Sometimes the operators fooled their pursuers, broadcasting from decoy locations or using dummy signals to lure German teams astray. Other times they lost men to the relentless hunt, their final messages cut short mid-sentence. Yet the network endured, strengthened by each sacrifice and fueled by an unbreakable purpose. In the aftermath of the Vemork raid, as the Commandos melted into the mountains and the Germans scoured the land, the radio men continued their silent war. They spread disinformation, sowed confusion, and kept the resistance coordinated, even as the net tightened around them. Through cold, hunger, and constant peril, they held a vital lifeline open between occupied Norway and the free world beyond. This was a battle fought not with guns or explosives, but with knowledge, nerve, and the relentless pulse of Morse code. In the shadows on the airwaves, the operation found its heartbeat, a rhythm of hope, defiance, and the unbreakable will to be heard. While radios crackled and explosives were primed, another force quietly shaped the fate of Operation Gunnerside, the sprawling network of local resistance fighters. In the icy valleys and silent forests of Telemark, men from all walks of life became architects of sabotage, weaving a web of support that stretched far beyond the Commandos themselves. The resistance was not a single unit, but a constellation of loosely connected cells, farmers, teachers, factory workers, even former soldiers, united by a shared resolve to resist the occupier. Their work was the invisible glue holding the operation together, their knowledge of the land and local routines critical to the mission's success. Safe houses dotted the countryside, their locations known only to a trusted few. Here Commandos could hide, rest, and plan their next moves, shielded from German patrols by men who risked everything for the cause. Resistance members forged documents, provided civilian clothes, and delivered vital supplies, food, maps, and even the occasional weapon, moving between villages under the cover of darkness and snow. The sabotage network also excelled in intelligence gathering. Scouts shadowed German convoys, noting the patterns of troop movements and reporting on the arrival of new equipment or reinforcements at Vemork. Local railway workers subtly delayed or diverted trains, disrupting enemy logistics and buying precious time for the raiders. Yet every act carried the threat of brutal reprisal. Coded messages and clandestine meetings became daily routines, while watchful eyes scanned for collaborators or informants. Trust was the currency of survival, and betrayal could mean disaster for an entire village. Still, the resistance endured, men whose names would never make the headlines, but whose courage rippled through every stage of the operation. When the final explosives were set, it was these networks that provided the escape routes, guiding the Commandos over frozen rivers and across snowbound passes, always one step ahead of the search parties. Their knowledge of hidden paths and unguarded crossings proved as vital as any weapon carried into Vemork. In the aftermath, as German forces tightened their grip, the resistance dissolved back into the landscape, their deeds and sacrifices woven into the fabric of Norway's struggle. The winter web they spun was fragile, but it held, supporting not just Operation Gunnerside but the spirit of defiance that would one day help reclaim their homeland. The detonation at Vemork echoed through the valleys, a thunderclap that signaled both triumph and immediate peril. For the men of Operation Gunnerside, the mission was only half complete. Now the true test began: escape. With the factory crippled, German searchlights swept the snowy wilderness, and patrols fanned out, determined to capture or kill the saboteurs. Guided by memory and instinct, the Commandos plunged into the heart of winter. There were no marked trails, only treacherous ravines and windswept plateaus, where the snowdrifts could swallow a man whole. Each step forward was a gamble. The terrain was as much an enemy as the soldiers who hunted them. Bitter winds clawed at exposed skin, and the temperature plummeted far below freezing. Frostbite threatened numb fingers, and exhaustion gnawed at every muscle. The Commandos moved in small groups, following routes mapped in secret by their resistance allies. They traveled mostly by night, leaving faint tracks that the swirling snow would soon erase. Silence was their shield. Every crunch of ice or snap of a twig could betray their position. Shelters were sparse, sometimes a half-buried shepherd's hut, other times only the lee of a boulder. Food was scarce, and sleep came in brief, shivering intervals. The men rationed chocolate and biscuits, melting snow for water, always alert to the sound of distant engines or barking dogs. As the days blurred into one another, the group split. Some headed east, toward the Swedish border and the promise of safety. Others remained behind, melting into the forest to continue the fight or to mislead the enemy. Every decision was a wager with fate. German forces closed in, laying ambushes along the most likely escape routes, but the Commandos' knowledge of the land, and their absolute trust in one another, proved decisive. They evaded patrols by crawling through frozen marshes, hiding beneath thick pine branches and doubling back across their own tracks. After over a week of relentless pursuit, the survivors finally crossed into neutral Sweden. Their bodies were battered, but their mission was accomplished. The world would soon learn of the sabotage at Vemork, but few would ever know the ordeal of the escape, how grit, brotherhood, and sheer willpower carried them through Norway's frozen wilderness, leaving only footprints in the snow and legends in their wake. As the last of Operation Gunnerside's commandos vanished into the Swedish forests, the ripples of their actions began to spread far beyond the icy plateaus of Norway. In dimly lit rooms across London, Stockholm, and Oslo, the true aftermath of the mission unfolded, not on the battlefield, but in the realm of intelligence. The escape was just the beginning. Now, coded messages flashed across clandestine radio channels, relaying news of the sabotage back to Allied headquarters. At Bletchley Park, analysts pored over intercepted German communications, searching for signs of confusion and panic. Reports trickled in. German scientists scrambled to assess the damage, while the Gestapo launched a ruthless hunt for answers. Meanwhile, the surviving saboteurs underwent rigorous debriefings. In safe houses behind neutral borders, they recounted every detail: timings, guard rotations, the composition of explosives, and the unexpected challenges faced. Each recollection was meticulously documented by intelligence officers who pieced together a clearer picture of both the operation's success and the German response. Back in occupied Norway, German authorities interrogated locals, desperate for leads. Resistance networks braced for reprisals, destroying documents and relocating safe houses. The operation's impact was measured not just by the destruction at Vemork, but by the wave of suspicion and paranoia it unleashed among the occupiers. The saboteurs' escape forced German command to divert resources, tighten security, and question the loyalty of the population. For the Allies, the intelligence gathered from the operation was invaluable. It revealed weaknesses in German security protocols and confirmed the critical importance of the heavy water plant. Planners debated next moves, weighing the risks of further sabotage against the mounting pressure on the enemy. In the shadows, the war of information raged on. Every coded message, every whispered report, and every silent observation added another layer to the unfolding story. A story where victory was not just measured in explosions but in secrets kept, shared, and uncovered. The legacy of Operation Gunnerside would echo not only in the annals of sabotage, but in the secret war of intelligence and counterintelligence, a war fought just as fiercely and just as crucially in the shadows.